Google. The topic we've got for you today is going for gold. And boy, do we have some amazing guests for you. But first, we wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands on which we meet and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to elders past, present, and emerging.
I'm Rachel Klooz, and I'm based here in lovely Sydney, Australia. And I'm also joined by my lovely co-facilitator and our executive sponsor, Catherine Melville.
Thanks, Rachel. Now, I'm super excited about what we've got lined up for you today. And the format that we're actually going to take you through today is that we're going to hear from our guests around their careers and what they've experienced to date. Then myself and Rachel will get to ask some questions and delve a little bit deeper into those topics that Rachel just mentioned. And then we actually will have a live Q&A. So as we're actually going through the session today, please do put your comments, your questions into the chat, as we actually will get that interaction later on today. But before we get to actually meet our guests today, let's give you a little sneak preview into their amazing careers.
Mark, Lucinda, Rosanna, we'd love to hear from each of you about your connection to the Olympics, your personal story, and a bit about where you are today and how you got here. So Mark, let's kick off with you.
Thank you very much for having me. How is everyone?
Good
to have you.
How are you?
Sorry, I just lost full sound there for a second, so I've relocated, as you can see, inside. Thank you very, very much for having me. I'm glad we got through that. I missed the video. So I'm hoping it was extremely good, but
it was awesome.
You won the gold medal. You won the gold medal. Just saying.
That's great.
We lost.
Yeah. So I guess to everyone listening, thank you very much for having me as part of today's event. My name is Mark Knowles. I am the former Australian men's hockey team player. The Kookaburras was our name. I was very, very lucky to play at 4 Olympic Games, winning an Olympic gold in 2004, bronze in 2008, bronze in 2012, and a really disappointing result for us in Rio. We came 6th. I played at 4 Commonwealth Games tournaments for Australia, and in 2014, I really had 2 significant individual moments, I would say, in my career, which I'll refer to a little bit later on. But in 2014, I was the World Hockey Player of the Year. And in 2018, at our Commonwealth Games, where we play against the Commonwealth countries, obviously, I was the flag bearer for the opening ceremony for Team Australia. And I guess that moment I'll touch on a little bit later, because it really was an ability, I guess, or it allowed me an ability to show people a different style of my leadership and the type of person that I kind of moved through my career as a young male sportsman to a middle-aged guy who thought he knew everything and probably should have and could have done a little bit more, through to the part of my career where I was far more comfortable, I guess, in the type of leader who I wanted to be and the type of team that I wanted to be involved in. And I was able to showcase that in the way that I led the team at the Commonwealth Games. So thank you very much for having me, and look forward to this next period of time.
We welcome you very much so, Mark. Now,
Thank
Mark,
you.
this talk is actually going out globally. So we're going to have a lot of people on the line, just before we move over to Lucinda, that will have no idea what a kookaburra actually is. So would you like to enlighten everybody listening as to what a kookaburra actually is in Australia?
Well, I would love to say that it's the Australian men's hockey team and it started there first. However, it is an amazing native bird of Australia. Sends out a great laugh when it's talking to its friends, and it's kind of its calling sign is it's very, very loud laughing noise. So in some ways, we were the kookaburras. Maybe it was a nice way for us because we were a bunch of young blokes who liked spending time together and tried to keep a smile on our face. But a native Australian bird, very, very normal for Australian sporting teams to grab an animal of choice as their slogan, or their mascot, or whatever that might be. But we were the kookaburras. Bit of a strange one, because people who think around world sport, and many people in Australia have said this, why aren't you, because the ladies team are the hockey roos, like a kangaroo, but hockey roos. And for me, it makes a lot more sense that we would be the hockey roos men and the hockey roos women. However, we're on our own at the moment. Guys and girls, male, female Australian teams are a bit separate. So we'll see what happens in the future. But think of that beautiful Australian loud laughing bird, and that's us, the kookaburras.
Love it. Thank you for sharing with everybody, and everyone can research it and actually listen to that laugh, because it is a quite unique and beautiful bird with just an amazing laugh. It really is.
It is.
I thought it was actually, when I first moved here, I called my parents telling them wild monkeys lived in the trees outside of my apartment. It turns out it was a kookaburra.
Yes.
Lucinda, would you like to share your personal story with us as well?
Yeah, thank you all for having us. This is really exciting, and we persevered through the start. The show always must go on, right? When there's when there's a little bleep. But yeah, anyway, nice to meet you all. My name's Lucinda, and I was an Olympic athlete for the London 2012 Games. I think my athlete career was around 6 to 7 years, so only one Olympics. I did have a go at going to Rio, but wasn't quite successful in making it into the team there. So decided that I was going to take on another adventure and go into the corporate world. So I spent a couple of years at Westpac, and then decided to tackle my MBA, which was an amazing experience over at University of New South Wales and London Business School, and then found myself at Calibra. And so Calibra, in fact, is a really close tie to Google. Capital G last year led a 100 million funding round, and so now we've got a really close tie with Google, which is exciting, and essentially helping businesses find, understand, and trust their data. So, yeah.
Amazing. A woman after my own heart in the enterprise tech business. Thank you for that, Lucinda. Rosanna, over to you.
So I have been invested in sport since I was very, very young, and my parents were actually a little bit concerned that I would want to watch cricket after school instead of, what might be some other after school shows, maybe more appropriate, getting up at 4 a.m. to watch Champions League games, or videotaping every Chicago Bulls championship game over 6 seasons that they won their championships. So I think there was something in my spirit and DNA for sport that meant when it was time to actually decide, well, where am I going and what am I doing from a career point of view, that sport had to be in there somewhere. I didn't particularly know at the time that I would want to move into sports psychology, or really understanding the mental performance of sport and competition, but it became one of the things that I'm so very passionate about. So there was probably something guiding me, maybe some kind of spirit through my early years. And when it came to deciding how I was going to tackle university, it needed to be something I was passionate about. And yes, I was actually passionate about psychology, passionate about sport, and then learnt that there was this thing called sports psychology. You could be a sports psychologist. So here I am, a registered psychologist, have a PhD, which looked at what were some of the psychological predictors of success in professional sport. I was quite enamored with AFL football, and absolutely taken with Olympic and Paralympic sport, or Australians representing their country. So my journey was early on, let's get registered as a psychologist, let's do that work, let's get some clinical skills in place, and then let's look to go where the opportunities are to get that coalface experience in high performance sport environments. So I ended up in Darwin at the Northern Territory Institute of Sport to do my internship. I then ended up in New Zealand, working at the New Zealand Academy of Sport, understanding their systems. So they were very early in my career. and then was given the opportunity to take on a senior role at the Australian Institute of Sport early on in my career, and it really afforded me so many opportunities to understand how many sports actually designed and delivered their high performance program to help athletes optimize their physical, mental preparation for what we prioritize: the Olympic Games, the Paralympic Games, the Commonwealth Games. They're our priorities in the Australian sports system. So from there, I was able to basically have the opportunity to work in sailing. So I worked with Lucinda as part of the sailing team. I went to 3 Olympic Games, and over 12 years learnt so much about optimizing mental preparation to get to the Games and deliver and execute and win. So that winning spirit was certainly a huge part of the passion and enthusiasm for being involved in those teams, is helping the athletes and coaches achieve their goals. The other opportunity I've had is to help set up a new AFL franchise, the GWS Giants, or the Greater Western Sydney Giants, and that's been an unbelievable opportunity over 8 years to build it from what is essentially bringing in young, talented athletes and turning that whole environment into what is now a consistent premiership contender. So the idea of well-being being important, developing people being important, leadership and culture being important, and then the performance standards that allow you to build a discipline to deliver success in pressure situations, or when you get to the Olympics, or when you get to that preliminary final to get into the grand final in footy. It's just been quite an amazing experience, and now I get the very great privilege of leading the Gold Medal Ready program at the Australian Institute of Sport, where I'm so fortunate to have a number of our Olympic gold medal athletes and coaches come back and share their experience with our athletes preparing for Tokyo, and really being able to learn from each other. And then around that, we've got education, as well as these immersive experiences where you really get the opportunity to test yourself in situations that then allow you to kind of prepare and prime for what the Olympic Games experience is going to be. So yeah, I've been pretty lucky to have all those wonderful opportunities, but what's been more exciting is all the amazing people that you get to meet along the way. And it's been an awesome ride, let me tell you. So yeah, certainly love this space of performance psychology, and I got a little bit in my DNA, this whole, what it takes to win, even though I can't probably do what Knowles and Lucinda have been able to do, which is compete. Maybe I can be there to just help support. So it's still really about winning, and I'm not really ashamed of that. I'm kind of pretty proud.
All those 4 a.m. moments where you were watching cricket have obviously paid off.
Yes,
your parents were wrong.
yes. So thanks, Mum and Dad. Just putting it out there. So, yeah,
Thanks
wonderful to be here.
Thanks so much, Rosie. Actually, we will dive a little bit deeper later into that Gold Ready program, because I think that's really interesting, that Gold Medal Ready. But Mark, we might just come back to you for a second and start with a question for you, if that's okay. So first, playing for Australia, representing your country at the Olympics, and then winning a gold medal at the Olympics in the first 6 months of your career, first of all. Pretty damn amazing achievement. So I can only imagine how that actually felt. And I'd love to hear from you how that did feel in the first 6 months of your career. But also then, where the heck do you go from there?
Well, it's very, very true. And if I'm honest, I thought that was just normal then. So when we only won bronze in 2008, 2012, and then bombed out in the quarterfinals in 16, I didn't know how significant a moment that was, and probably until I retired. But very quickly, I'll just share that story because I was 20 years old. I came into the team, an absolutely elite group. But I will go back to 2003, the year before the Athens Olympics. I'd never played for Australia. the national coach called me in January 2003 and he said, "Knowlesy, you played really well in some junior tournaments. I went to Europe in an emerging or a development squad tour, played fairly well. He said, we want you to come to Perth and be part of the national program." So I thought my dreams were about to come true. I was about to play for Australia. The first day that I arrived in Perth to play for Australia, I broke my ankle. And I was just turned 19 the week before. I was a young kid. I'd hardly had anything go wrong. And I thought, far out, like, is this what it's meant to be like? I'd moved across to Perth and a couple of the guys came up and, "Oh, matey, you're right. What are you going to do?" And I honestly just said, "What do you mean? What am I going to do? This is what I've always wanted to do. I'm just going to do my rehab. I'm going to do everything I can possible to get back." So I did 4 months of rehab. When the guys were on the field training, I watched. When the guys were in the gym, I was boxing. When the guys were doing skill work, I was sitting on a chair because I was still in crutches. And 4 months later, I remember the day so clearly. It was a Friday morning in Perth. It was really cold and I was allowed to train for the first time. And what that 4 months did for me as a young player is it actually allowed me to watch and observe. And I share this story really openly with some young players now that I actually don't feel I was ready to jump straight in with those guys. But the time out being injured actually gave me this opportunity to see what high standards were, to see the level of competition, to see the speed that they play at. And I thought after 4 months, okay, I'm right now. I'm 19 and a half. I've aged a little bit. I'm ready. And my first training back, I broke my ankle again.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so in 2003, 1 year before the Olympics in Athens, I never trained one day. And I actually thought that my Olympic dreams of making even the national squad of 24 players were gone. And I kind of just stuck at it. I came back in January 2004 and the national coach, Barry, at the time said, "Oh, Knowlesy, we're going to just take a development group over to the Aslan Shah tournament in Malaysia. We want you to make your debut." And I went over there as this kid. I was 19. I thought, how cool is this? I'm playing for Australia. This is my dream. I was not really even thinking about the Olympics or anything like that in 6 months' time. I played all right. We won. And I guess the more that I was engaged with that program, the more that I felt like I wanted to go to the Olympics. And I'm going to touch on a little bit around, I guess, the stages of leadership and team culture and some of those things that were so important to me. But the last part I want to share about that time was being a 20-year-old kid from country Queensland. I grew up on a property. You want the tracksuit. You want an Olympic tracksuit. And I remember going to the Olympics and we arrived there. Our 4 bags full of clothes were there in our room. And I was trying every piece of clothing on. And I was just running around. I was showing every kid. I was showing every kit. I was sending photos to my parents. And one of the leaders came up to me, the co-captain. He said, "Mate, we don't play hockey at the Olympics for Australia to get the tracksuit. We play to win." And it completely changed my mindset of being an Australian men's hockey team player at the Olympics. It was more than the tracksuit. And it was the first real, really strong point of leadership that I ever had, given to me or thrown at me. So I thought I'd just share that. But yeah, it was disappointing, I tell you, going to 2008, 12 and 16 and then not winning.
Now, you touched on there as well, leadership, because one thing you've just missed out is that you actually became the captain as well of the national hockey field team. And I read a quote from the head coach, I think it was in 2018, the same year that actually you retired, which we'll come on to a little bit later. I think it was Colin Batch. And he said that he saw your leadership grow from a lead by example to a style now that was incredibly inspirational, and where you not only do what you say you're going to do, but you really, really inspire. Now, we often focus on leadership attributes here at Google. So what would you say were the attributes that made you such an inspirational leader that Colin quoted on there?
I think one of the things that I would add to everybody listening is that leadership is so multidimensional. It's constantly moving. You have to constantly evolve with different people, different groups. I lead as a husband and a father far differently than I did of 27 national players. I led a Commonwealth Games team or an Olympic group far differently than I did in a Perth training environment. So I think the first thing I'd say about leadership is that if you're not constantly evolving and altering who you are and how you're trying to lead, you'll get left behind. I think that was really important for me, that I didn't learn for quite a while. I think the other part about leadership is it takes a fair while to understand how you want to lead. And when I first started in 2003, it was a 100% lead by example. There wasn't much talk back then around relationship building and your life as a father and a person in the community and all of those kind of things. It was really who's training harder, who's doing more, who's staying longer, who's getting there earlier. So that was the way that I led early on. It was the people who I aspired to be like, was the people who I was leading like. I guess in the middle part of my career, when I became the captain, I was 24 years old, and I took over as one of the co-captains of the national team. For me, I lost my way. I reckon between 2004 and 2008, I really lost kind of my vision of who I was. I think in that age, as a young male, you try and lead by what people think you want, or what you saw on TV, not actually who you are. And I lost a bit of my my personality and my leadership style in that period. I think I overplayed leadership, and I went too far the other way, where you're actually doing too much and not actually allowing anyone to do anything themselves and empowering others. And I guess the part that Colin Batch is talking about was he actually completely changed the type of person I was by the way that he came in as my coach. And one of the messages that I think is very powerful is when Colin took over as the national coach in December 2016, straight after we bombed out of the Olympics in 16, he said, the first thing he said to me was, "Knowles, you're still going to be in this group. You are the only captain or the only leader that we want. We don't want you to retire." But he said, "What I really want from you is I want you to continue in what I've seen recently, where you're sitting just above this group. You're acting like a bit of a mentor. You're playing like an assistant coach on the field." He said, "So don't be afraid to be a little bit above the group." And I had not felt like that before. So he actually empowered me in some ways to take on that. And the second part that he spoke to me about, which I think is the most powerful thing I heard, was he said what he wanted out of me as a leader was that the guys knew that I was the best trainer in Australia. The guys knew at that stage that I was the best player in Australia. But he said, how I want you to lead this group is, he said, I want you to share with them the importance of the connection with their partners. Keep bringing your kids to training. Keep being active in the community by being a role model for young athletes and sports people. And it was amazing that he never actually told me to run faster, hit harder, or yell louder. He talked about all of these things that were, I would say, empowering leadership, where he challenged me to lead guys through, connection and family and community rather than being the best. So in some ways, my leadership went through these three phases. And I think when you're in them, why I love being part of events like this is that when you're in leadership, sometimes you're scared to talk about it. There's this piece around vulnerability that I guarantee you between 2004 and 2008, I would have never said I was leading poorly, but I think we actually have to look at ourselves a little bit more. And for me, the style of leadership that I moved into later in my career was definitely the style that I'm most comfortable with. But I think it was also the style that the group needed at that time. They needed someone just to relate to them. We had guys studying, young families, and for me that became so powerful in my own messages, but also what they heard from me. So it wasn't just the screaming of halftime and quarter time talks. I was talking and working with them around their relationships and their partners and their families and living overseas and contracts in Europe. So that was, I guess, my style of leadership, or my journey of leadership.
I love that, Mark. I think we have something a little bit similar here at Google, where we talk about bringing your whole self to work.
Yeah.
You know, the reality is, like you say, you know, some of us are parents, or we're brothers or sisters, and we have passions outside of work. And to be able to bring that, it just creates such a deeper connection with our colleagues and with people that potentially work for you as a leader as well. So 100% on board. Really.
Yeah, I agree. And I think certainly in a sporting team, the part that I missed early on in that mid period of my leadership was that it's okay that everybody didn't want to be like me. I think they all wanted to be an elite player, but some of them didn't want to work in the community. Some of them didn't have a wife and kids. Some of them didn't want to be spoken to in different ways. And I think that part was the part that I missed early on. I just thought, why isn't everyone like me? Yeah. And, you know, when you're in a national squad of 27 guys, it's very rare. And probably we actually don't want all 27 guys to be the same. It would have been a fairly boring team if we had 27 of me.
Absolutely. We talk about diversity and the value of diversity within teams quite a lot as well. So there's a lot of common themes there. Lucinda, I think we'll move over to you for a bit. I'd actually like to ask you some questions about resilience, which is a leadership trait we talk a lot about at Google. So in 2010, you won the Australian Female of the Year Sailor. In 2012, you were chosen to represent Australia in the Olympics. Very impressive, by the way. And in the 2012 games, your teammate went overboard mid-race, but you came together, you got her back on the boat, you bounced back, and you ended up bringing home a silver medal for Australia. Even more. So can you tell us a little bit more about, go ahead, tell us about that experience.
Out of the
beautiful.
But
I love it. It's as close as I've ever been to one.
And or ever will. As close as we ever will.
Yeah. That was crazy. That was like, you know, I was thinking about it when you said that, you know, question across before, going, yeah, that was a moment of where we did have to pick ourselves back up, and we had to pick ourselves back up as a team. But, you know, when you talk about resilience, I feel like there's a fine line between resilience and preparation. And we were in that moment of, well, we didn't really have much choice other than to, you know, pull ourselves together and keep racing and keep thinking about what's next and keep thinking about what decisions needed to be made to crawl ourselves back into a position where we were still in contention to win the gold medal. So I guess just to give everyone some context, it was the finals. So it was us against the Spanish, and it was first to 3 wins. And this race we were leading, and then obviously Olivia had fallen out of the boat, and it meant that we'd lost that race. But we had another race where we won. So essentially we turned that situation around and we were 2-2. And then it went down to the final race. And that was when, I think in the video at the start, you saw us having to do a penalty at the finish line. So, yeah, we made an infringement. And then, you know, because you have to do a penalty, you're behind the Spanish boat. But, yeah, going to resilience, I think the whole experience of leading up to the games is probably where I learned that skill. And it is certainly a learned skill. Rosie can probably dive into that a little bit later, but it took me a long time to unpack that, because you have to be vulnerable and you have to be, I guess, open to failure. And that wasn't me at the start. And I think, like you have to certainly be open to that. And through that period of going to the games, there was around 12 to 16 girls vying for 3 positions. And in 2010, I was actually told, okay, you've reached your potential, thanks, but you're no longer in the squad anymore. And so that was probably the turning point for me, because it was like, well, okay, I'd reached my potential, you know, why was that? You really had to look at yourself and you know, question everything as to your philosophy of how you went about doing things. And then I got the opportunity to come back into the team. I made a phone call and was like, hey, you know, I'm around, I'll come sailing, let's have a go again. And essentially that pressure had been lifted, and it was more about focusing on, you know, the next step. How are we going to be better? How was I going to be a better team player? How was I going to just focus on sailing the boat better? And that essentially put me in a really strong position to then get selected for the Olympics. So, yeah, resilience. It's something that, you know, I'm still learning every day as well. Like back in the corporate world as well, especially in the current environment that we're in right now, it's not easy. And it's got me a silver medal, but I think there's some more exciting things happening too.
Well, and I love how you talked about that preparation was really the key, right?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't just appear resilient one day because you were prepared and because you took the time to be in the place where you needed to be in order to be successful. It allowed you that to become such an easy thing.
That's right. And so,
go ahead.
That's something that Rosie really, I guess, helped us with along the way. You know, the most important thing was, are you prepared? Do you feel ready? What comes your way? You know, in sailing, there's plenty of what we call, you know, you get dealt a bad card, and how do you deal with that? Because a lot of it's out of your control. All you have to do is deal with it better than your competitor.
Amazing. I could probably take a page out of that book, which I just might need to do. So kind of moving on, as we've mentioned, Catherine and myself are involved in a program at Google that empowers future female leaders. So I was so pleased to read many articles about you discussing how you personally know there's still a long way to go in order to achieve really true gender equality in the workforce. And you know, you were quoted saying many things, but the one I'll call out is essentially you were inspired to be a leader who helps women advance in their careers as you continue to grow as a leader yourself. So for our audience, what resilient tips on resilience do you have for aspiring female leaders as they progress through their careers?
Yeah, well, I think you know, certainly with gender equality, we're in an ultra marathon. So I wish we had someone in it.
Good analogy.
Like, it's a long way, right? Like I was reading a stat, you know, we're maybe 100 years away from it in reality, and we probably only have competed like a half marathon at this point. So we've got a long way to go. But, you know, my tip is that when it feels like it's such a big goal and so far away from us, the only really thing that we can do is just try and break it down and make them more realistic goals and shorter distance goals to feel like we're actually achieving something. Otherwise, it's like this big overwhelming environment and goal, and you kind of just sit back and you go, well, can I really do anything to make change? So yeah, that's my tip.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And I think we call them almost sometimes micro moments at Google, or like the little micro segment or the little micro goal that you have. It makes it so much easier to achieve that goal. And it all goes back to planning and resilience and everything we've kind of been talking about here. So thank you for that, Lucinda.
That's all right.
Now, Rosanna, I might move on to you if that's okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that you manage a gold medal ready program at the AIS. And that's focused on enhancing mental performance. So can you share a little bit more about what are the kind of key enhancers of mental performance? And also maybe if there's any detractors of mental performance too, especially in the current situation that we all find ourselves. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the Gold Medal Ready program is an ethos as much as it is a process to be ready to perform under pressure at the Olympic Games or the Paralympic Games to deliver that best performance and get on the podium. and really the opportunity to learn from some of Australia's very best athletes and how they did it. So Knowles and Lucinda sharing how they went about it, being a really important learning avenue for our athletes and coaches as they move towards their own competition in Tokyo next year. Was supposed to be as we speak right now, but it'll be next year. And creating some of those immersive experiences where you do start to actually put yourself in the moment and start to, as Lucinda said, like, what am I going to do in these various situations? How will I cope? How will I actually embrace this situation and be able to direct my focus to what I need to do to execute the level of performance required, or make the right decision in this moment, or be agile enough to recover if we haven't been performing so well. So the program is designed to provide that kind of curriculum, lived experience and familiarization to our athletes, and leverage the great Australian athletes that we have sharing their knowledge and experience along the way. We also have a partnership with the Australian Army Special Forces that help share some of their experiences about combat stress. So really trying to provide this diverse way of learning about how to prepare yourself mentally to deliver a level of mental performance in competition in the most amount of stress and pressure, which for us in sport will be the Olympic Games final for that gold medal, and the competition up until that point. And we also have to understand the importance of mental recovery and self-care. So if you're going to keep preparing yourself in such a way that requires great discipline, great resilience, as Lucinda mentioned, and requires constant leadership, as Knowles talked about, then that process of preparation performance requires recovery and self-care. So we talk a lot about that concept of mental recovery and self-care being very important in this high performance sport environment. So hopefully in the current climate and what's happening, there's that need to prepare, perform, but also recover and take that opportunity for some self-care. So I think that it's important to understand performance across those 4 particular areas, not just about in the moment, in the competition. It's actually a whole process and system that goes to delivering a level of performance. So that's what we try to present to our athletes and coaches. So it's been by design and by time in sport to understand how important all these things are, and maybe some time ago we weren't so focused on recovery and self-care, but now it's certainly another critical part of ensuring that when it matters most, you are ready to perform. So that's part of the spirit of Gold Medal Ready, as well as the idea of executing and getting on the podium as well.
Thanks, Rosie. Now, I also noticed mention of collaboration and diverse thinking in relation to optimizing a mindset. Now, we're extremely focused at Google, particularly in these 2 areas, as we look to kind of success factors of what makes up a high-performing team. So how do these apply to an individual athlete?
Yeah, well, I think we have to consider that the individual athlete has also a performance team around them. So they're the coach and teammates and others that are actually helping to support their physical preparation and their mental preparation. So that there's a team around that individual. We talk a lot about being able to accept stress, accept pressure, absorb it. We talk about being able to direct your focus. We talk about what is your role, executing your role, or the set play, or what are you particularly responsible for to contribute to that level of performance. And then we also talk a lot about reviewing performance, so being able to look critically at performance on the task, and make sure that you can actually have really good structured conversations about task performance, and not to some extent bring yourself into that. Just talk about the performance and be really critical about how we are going to get improvement, iteration, and evolution. So we are constantly in this learning loop. And I think from the perspective of the athlete, being able to absorb that conversation constantly requires resilience, because it's constantly about get better, improve this. How do I, it can seem a little bit kind of like we're sweating the small stuff, but the small stuff actually ends up being the things that help create that standard and that level of consistency required to be able to deliver in those pressure moments. So that talk performance piece, I think, is often not highlighted enough in its structure and how to do it in such a way that brings us that iteration in standard and performance. So in that, we can be talking about the behaviours of the individual, the standards of the culture, but then we can be talking about the nitty-gritties of technically how that was executed, from a process or system point of view, how it was executed, and then what are we going to do to make the improvements. And often that critical component of what are the actions we need to take are often not very well and specifically defined. In sport, we actually do that debrief process really well. So, the actions to take into the next game or the next into the next match, as Lucinda had best of five. How are you taking those actions into the next chance to demonstrate performance? So that talk performance piece is probably the way in which we in sport get that critical level of output consistently and with the discipline required.
Got it. Thanks, Rosie. Now I can see we've got quite a few questions from the audience, and there is one that I think we can do almost as a quick fire that I really like, which is Mark and Lucinda. First of all, if you had to be a gold medalist in another sport, what would it be and why? Quickly. And then, of course, Rosie, what would be your calling? What would be your gold medal? So, Mark, do you want to go first? You got to pick another sport. No hockey.
Yeah, all right. Mine would be triathlon.
I was going to say
That would mean.
See, no one cared what sport we would be best.
Nobody else does.
And you just took 3 more.
You don't get 3 medals, just because you become a triathlete.
That's not what you tell your friends.
What about you?
I was going to say that, but thinking of another one now, I would have to say surfing, because I think it's pretty cool. But I'm terrified of sharks, hence why I was a sailor, not a surfer. So getting me in the water is going to be an issue, but I reckon if you could master the skill of surfing, that would be pretty amazing.
Nice. Good one. And Rosie?
Yeah, so my very favourite sport to play was indoor volleyball. So I always wanted to be Maria Luis from the Cuban team. I just loved her. So, I've got indoor volleyball. But to be very honest, as a young person, I wasn't introduced to sailing. And to have been involved in it, if there was anything I could do, I would have loved to have had a go. It's such an amazing sport that would be my other, if I could be an Olympian sport.
You can sail, Lucy.
I could up here maybe. Maybe not on the boat.
There's another great one there from Laura. Do you want to read that one out? Can you see it?
Go ahead. We are showing our age here.
Yeah, we
don't have our glasses on because of the glare. So, Lucinda, how do you think athletes are managing the Olympic postponement, and what would you do in this situation? Very good question. Feel free to weigh in.
Questions.
Yeah, so I think some athletes would be struggling, and some athletes would be smart and reframing the situation that they're in to go, this is a really good opportunity to, again, have more time, because time's the biggest factor in all of this, to prepare myself physically and mentally. What's another 365 days, but it'll actually make a big difference at the end of the day. So I mean, I would be probably at the start freaking out, going, oh, I've peaked, I'm right at the moment of where I should be. But now, yeah, you have to think about reframing that situation to give yourself the best chance in another 12-month time.
More time to prepare, as we've talked.
Yeah.
Got it. Here's one from Sean. Does the panel have a view about sports specialization? We often hear that children should do a number of sports and not specialize at an early stage. Ooh. What's the panel's view on that? Who wants to go first? Mark, we heard about your children earlier. It's hockey all the way in your house.
No, I'll answer that. And this is my own personal opinion, but I grew up in, as I said, in country Queensland. I was one of the better hockey players. But I actually think that by kids trying different sports, being not the best at sports is a really good thing for life and sport. And I mean, I'm very open that I was the worst swimmer at my school, but I was the fastest runner. So I was always the first in the pool. So I just think that this ability for kids to try different sports, to be around different people, to be coached by a different voice and a different language will actually help them be far more resilient. We heard Lou talk about that, and I think well-rounded in the future. I guess the biggest problem we have in sport in general in the world that I see, and especially in Australia, is everybody thinks that if we don't get them really young, another sport will get them. And that's why we're seeing these crazy contracts at young age. I work in elite sport now, and we're trying to get athletes to come out of school at year 9 and 10 to move to Brisbane to specialise in a sport. And I said, but why not let her just spend that time with her friends until year 12? What's going to matter? And they said, oh, well, AFLW will definitely get her, or cricket will get her, or hockey will get her, and she'll stop swimming. So I think in general, there's a part there of the perception of sport. And the other big issue that we have, of course, I'm one of them now, is parenting. And that's a total different topic, but parents are also the ones who are pushing this issue. They're the ones who are forcing kids to get the contracts and to train more. So I think that's my long answer, but I absolutely love, I didn't specialise in hockey until I made the decision in year 10 when I went to the Sydney Olympics in 2000. It was the first time that I ever said I wanted to be a hockey player.
Wow.
But I mean, so I always wanted to play hockey. I always wanted to go to the Olympics, but I was always still playing cricket. I was still playing rugby league. I was still playing tennis. And it wasn't until year 11 or 12 that I actually started to focus in a bit more on a sport.
Oh, I'll tell my son that. He'll be really pleased. He's only year 8, and he now knows he's got a bit more time then, because I think he wants to be an NBA player, but he needs to get a little bit more height, I think. Stretchy man.
So Rosie, I saw a question that was highlighted for you as well in this. If you could speak to essentially how performance psychology and just sports in general can be helpful when you think about mental health issues and professional athletes successfully transitioning into normal life. I mean, not only with COVID, but just in general, we do a lot of work at Google to bring more mental health issues and awareness to the surface. So it'd be great to hear kind of your insight and thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about any kind of organizational performance system across some pillars, and one of the key pillars is well-being, welfare, and we often underestimate the impact of that as a pillar in then being able to allow our people, in whatever role they play, to be able to consistently deliver a level of performance that they're proud of, but also that can, lead us to achieving our outcomes. So that well-being welfare piece is really very fundamental to any organizational system or process. It's starting to become more and more valued and understood, and a lot more resources going into that space, rather than maybe the performance review or, you know, sitting on that other end of the spectrum. And I know in the time I've been in professional sport or elite sport, we've certainly invested a lot more into mental health literacy, understanding the mental health issues that are prevalent in an athlete population, and being able to support the athletes to build those skills and understanding of their own mental health, when that mental health is, declining, but also when it's being optimized. So it's very, very important to learn those skills as a person, because it helps you actually navigate day to day. How can I then set the goals and tasks for the day? How can I actually bring energy and purpose to the work that I need to do? Or do I actually need to take some time and practice some self-care here? And we're getting so much better at understanding that balance. And the better we get, the better performance outcomes we're going to get at the individual level. And again, I use that term, an individual has pride in their performance at work, or an athlete has pride in their outcomes at training and seeing progress and then competing in competition. So we've come a long way in investing in mental health, and I think it's only going to help us going forward. So I really encourage organisations, including sports, to consider that wellbeing welfare space. And I know every sport that I've worked with, I've certainly made that a key priority. Otherwise, the work I can do from a mental performance point of view is often just burning that person out. You know, like we're actually starting at the wrong place to enhance performance. So for me, with the investment in mental health well-being is just really important as a performance process. So
okay, before I hand over to Rachel to thank you all for today properly, I know you can cope with pressure. So how about a 30-second takeaway? How about Mark will give you the topic of leadership, Lucinda resilience, and maybe Rosie would give you focus on well-being. 30 seconds of what you would like our audience to take away from our chat today. Mark, are you ready? Quick fire.
Yeah, I'm first. All right. I think for me, very quickly, leadership is ever evolving. Very few leaders are exactly the same. Put some time and effort into the type of person that you want to be, not that people are telling you to be. And I just say that I think at the moment, the people side of understanding who you work with and how they work, and that relationship building is as important as anything else. So they're my tips on leadership.
Love it. Thanks, Mark. Love it. Lucinda?
Yeah, so I think I would say to everyone, as cliche as it sounds, like, don't be afraid of failing, because, you know, if you can fail fast and learn from it, then you're only going to be more resilient, and then you'll be able to be a better athlete, person in your job, better business, better progression, better for your customers. So yeah, I'd say fail fast, but learn faster.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank you. Rosie, how do we all look after ourselves in this current environment and make sure we maintain well-being as best as we can?
Yeah, well, the first thing is to have some goals and some tasks that you actually do want to put some focus and energy into, and from that, take the time to understand the preparation required, the performance required from you, but then definitely plan out how you are going to take some mental recovery and what self-care looks like. And a lot of the time, we're not really sure what works for us. So even having a bit of a mental recovery and a self-care plan, and ensuring that you are circuit breaking your days with mental recovery and self-care, not just your months and your years with a 4-week holiday, is actually really, really important to maintaining the motivation, being able to accept the stress that comes with what's going on at the moment, and keep directing your focus to what is really important to you and your family, and you know, for many of us, what our workplace requires of us. So for me, it's understanding that mental recovery and self-care are actually daily things. They're not just every now and then things, because the importance of them for performance and for motivation and for the ability to regulate your emotions and deal with and accept the stress that is very evident in our day-to-day at the moment is really, really important. So mental recovery and self-care, more than you do right now.
Thank you so much for speaking with Catherine and I today, you guys. It's been lovely. And I think one of the really big kind of key takeaway for me was, I love the concept, you know, Mark, that you brought up, that leadership is constant, and you're not just a leader at work. You need to think about your more holistic life, right? And Lucinda, to your point on, you need to be prepared. You need to be taking the steps and giving yourself the time and the space to repair. And, you know, Rosie, to your point as well, to recover. And I like to say, you know, especially right now, being in front of a screen all day, every day is not productivity. And at times we have to take a step back, right, in order to take a couple of steps forward, in order to be the leaders that we want to be, and that constantly evolving type of leader that we need to be in the different situations that, you know, life or work or sport might call upon us. So with that, guys, thank you so much for your time. Catherine, anything else?
No, just thank you, and thank you to Rachel, and thank you to all three of you, and for everybody that's joined us today. We hope you've got as much out of this session as we certainly have.
Yes.
That's it. Now we're going to pick our sport, and next time you see us, we might have left it slightly late. We're slightly past year 10 mark. I'm not sure we actually will achieve it.
We'll see you at the Olympics next year.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.